From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming on this cool day. Welcome to today's program featuring economist Tim Harford. I'm Bill Sittig, Chief of the Library's Science, Technology, and Business Division, and this event is one in our series in which we learn from important writers, thinkers, and practitioners in the various fields of science, technology, business, and economics. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to mention a few of our upcoming programs. On February 14th, St. Valentine's Day, our own Abby Grotke from the Office of Strategic Initiatives will give us advice from her book, Miss Abigail's Guide to Dating, Mating, and Marriage. You're not going to want to miss this event, which will feature an exhibit of 19th century books on manners from the library's collections, as well as snacks from recipes from these books. On more serious subjects, on February 26th, Paul Orfila, founder of Kinko's, will speak on the book he co-authored with Anne Marsh entitled Copy This, Lessons from a Hyperactive Dyslexic Who Turned a Bright Idea into One of America's Best Companies. And on March 21st, we will feature a presentation by Mark Nash, realtor, television commentator, and author of 4 books on real estate, including his recent book, 1001 Tips for Buying and Selling a Home. I hope you will be able to join us for all of these presentations. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Carolyn Larson, sitting in the front row here, of our business reference staff, for all her good work in preparing for today's program. Carolyn has prepared a bibliography of books mentioned in Tim's book and has assembled a display of some of these books from the library's collections. Please help yourself to copies of the reading list, which is on the side table there, and please spend some time looking through the books. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Tim Harford, an economic columnist for the Financial Times. Tim writes the Dear Economist column, in which he analyzes readers' questions using the tools of modern economics and the wit of Miss Manners. Last year, he began writing a second column, The Undercover Economist, which, like his book by the same title, explains the economics behind our day-to-day experiences. This latter column is syndicated in the U.S. magazine Slate and in Canada's Commerce. Tim was born and educated in Britain, receiving his degree in economics from Oxford. He has been a tutor at Oxford, a speechwriter for Stanley Fischer, now the governor of the Bank of Israel, a scenario expert at Shell, and he worked as an economist at the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank. He lived here in Washington for a couple of years when he worked there. I think I read somewhere that he started the first blog at the World Bank. Tim is a prolific writer. In addition to his regular columns, he has published in numerous international newspapers, including the Washington Post, Forbes, the New York Times. Last year, he was awarded the Bastiat Prize by the International Policy Network for his writings promoting economic understanding. He is the presenter on a new BBC series entitled Trust Me, I'm an Economist. And he is the author of 2 books, The Market for Aid, which he co-authored in 2005 for the International Finance Corporation, and The Undercover Economist, first published by Oxford University Press in 2006 and published in paperback this year by Random House. Tim has signed copies of this book, which are for sale right in the corner of this room here. He would be very pleased if you would use your market power as a good consumer by purchasing copies of this book following today's program. I must say that Tim is going to have to leave immediately following this program. He's going to be interviewed on WAMU at 1 o'clock by Kojo Namdi. So please, if you have questions, you will have to ask them during the program, which will have to end sharply at 12:30. I enjoyed flipping through this book. On my quick perusal of the book, I discovered why there's a Starbucks on every corner and why the prices at Whole Foods, where my wife and I usually shop, are not really much higher than at the neighboring Safeway. Perhaps Tim will fill you in on some of these secrets. It is now my honor to welcome Tim Harford to the Library of Congress. Tim.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's a very generous introduction. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. I'm very honored to be speaking at the Library of Congress. It's wonderful to be back in DC, which is a city that I'm very fond of and lived here for a couple of years. My daughter was born here. This all by way of explaining to you that economists are people too, economists are human too. But that said, I'm hopefully by the end of the time we have together, I'll talk for half an hour or so, and we'll have some questions. I hope you'll have questions. I hope you'll understand that economists are people too, and that economics is nothing if it can't help people with their personal problems. It won't have escaped your notice that in a week's time it's Valentine's Day. There is, of course, an event here at the library. I won't be here, so I'm going to try and tell you about Valentine's Day now. Nobody here will need dating advice, but you'll all have a lot of friends, I'm sure, and some of your friends may be lonely on Valentine's Day, and they may need some assistance finding that special person. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that there's nobody better to give dating advice than an economist. I want to tell you first about my experience helping a lovelorn playboy called Andy. We filmed this for the show, Trust Me, I'm an Economist. Andy's problem, I think a lot of men have this problem. He's a good-looking guy, he's charming, but women just didn't entirely trust him. There was something about him. I think it was the fact that he wore his shirt to the navel and had a medallion. But he needed a little bit of help, a little bit of extra help from economics. And so he responded to our invitation to come on the TV show. And I'm sure you'll understand the basic problem Andy had and the solution. He really needed to think of himself as a dodgy-looking DVD player languishing on the shelves of Walmart. That's what I explained to him anyway. He didn't thank me for the comparison. But when we think about the problem that the manufacturer has selling a DVD player, maybe you don't know the manufacturer too well. This was a problem that really affected Japanese electronics manufacturers in the 70s initially. And it's hard to imagine that Japanese products were regarded as being shoddy and unreliable, but they were. And how the Japanese got around this was, well, put yourselves in their shoes. You can offer a discount to the customer, but if the basic problem is the customer doesn't really know if the product is going to perform when you get it home, which I think was also Andy's problem. If the customer doesn't know that the product is going to perform, then offering a discount doesn't. Well, there are two problems. First, it doesn't solve your essential problem, which is that the customer doesn't know if you're offering a quality product. And the second problem is that even if you do make the sale with a discount, you've obviously lost money because you had to offer a discount to make the sale. So there's two reasons you don't want to offer a discount in order to get over this quality hurdle. What would you do instead? You offer a money-back guarantee, a free money-back guarantee. And this has two positive effects. The first is that it reassures the customer that if there's a problem, they get their money back. But that's not really what a money-back guarantee is about. A money-back guarantee is a cast-iron signal of quality. Yeah? Any manufacturer can say, this is a great DVD player, this is a great CD player. Anybody can say it. That's just advertising. We ignore that. But the money-back guarantee says this really is a great product, because if it's not great, you're going to bring it back, and if you bring it back, it's going to cost us a ton of money. So we know that it's a good product. We know you won't bring it back. That's the signal. To an economist, talk is cheap, but that sort of action really proves that you've got a quality product. Now, I'm sure you're way ahead of me here, and you can see how Andy would be able to offer a money-back guarantee on a date. But just in case you don't quite see where this is going, we took Andy to a speed dating evening. You may know about speed dating. You have 20 guys and 20 girls, and they pair up and sit down at a little table, and the host who's organising the speed dating event rings a little bell, and they talk to each other for 3 Chardonnay-fueled minutes. And then the host rings a bell, all the guys get up, move to the next table, sit down, and so you meet 20 people over the course of just over an hour. You have a little card, a little box, yes or no. And if you tick the yeses, and if the person who you were meeting also ticks a yes, at that point the speed dating company will give contact details. So it's a real, it's serious. If you tick yes and you never want to see this guy again, he's going to get your phone number. You don't want that. So you tick yes if you mean yes, you tick no if you mean no. Economists love this. It's a great way of generating information, by the way. They found out all kinds of exciting things. But on this particular occasion, we weren't interested in finding out about speed dating. We were interested in playing this game to win. We put the TV camera down in front of the speed dating table. We sit Andy down and we say, okay, Andy, here's your money back guarantee. You pick the girl you most like. You offer her 2 tickets to see the best show at the West End. This is London, right? It's like Broadway, only it's in London. We offer you 2 tickets to see the best show. You offer her 2 tickets to see the best show at the West End. Don't offer it as a bribe. Don't offer it with any conditions. Just give her the tickets. They're for a show in a month's time. And now we forget about the tickets. And you say to her, we've only got 90 seconds here just talking. I know that if you got to know me, if we went on a date, we could have a picnic in Hyde Park, we could go out for dinner, you'd really like me if you got to know me. So let's have a date. Let's give it a try. And then after a couple of dates, you're going to open your desk drawer, you're going to get out the tickets in a month's time, and you're going to look at the tickets and say, 2 tickets to see a show. Who could I possibly bring with me? Andy. Andy's a great guy. I'll bring Andy with me. So that's why it's a money-back guarantee, because if Andy performs as expected on the date, if he is in fact an engaging and likable young man, then he gets to see the show after all. And if in fact he doesn't deliver and is in fact an offensive medallion-wearing bore, then at least the girl gets 2 free tickets to go to the show with some other guy to compensate her for the evening she wasted with Andy. So really, satisfaction is guaranteed. So we put the TV cameras on him, we sat him down, beautiful girl, gave her the tickets. It was a total disaster. It was a complete catastrophe. And that's why, for all the title of the show, Trust Me, I'm an Economist, trusting an economist is something you should never do. And by the time I've finished with you, you will understand why you should never trust an economist. I hope that you'll also understand a little bit about why we have an excuse for our disreputable reputation, why there's actually a reason why you shouldn't trust economists. And knowing that reason helps you understand the way the economy works a little bit more. So that's what I'd like to do. One of the reasons why you shouldn't trust an economist is because, well, there's no nice way to put this. Economists don't understand the economy, it's a shame, I know. But there's a reason they don't understand the economy. They don't understand the economy because the economy is a very complicated thing. Think about, for example, a cappuccino from Starbucks, which is something I write about incessantly in my book. There's a cappuccino on the brain. And think about a cappuccino. Does anybody here know how to make a cappuccino by any chance? So we've got a lady here. So how are you with milking cows? Not so good. Yeah, I know. I get confused and everything, which bit goes where. Yeah, you could, if you're given milk and coffee, maybe pre-ground coffee, or a coffee grinder, which was designed by some long-forgotten engineer. If you're given electricity generated in some far-off place by people you don't know, with processes you don't understand very well, coffee that was grown in Guatemala and flown to you and roasted, and you're not sure exactly how that process works. If you're given all those raw ingredients, then I'm convinced that you make a beautiful cappuccino. However, you're just the last... This is the final yard of a long, long process. And that's true for most products in the modern economy. I think I'm safe in saying there is actually nobody in the world who can make a cappuccino from scratch. If you just say, okay, the world is your oyster, now you have to go and grow coffee, you have to dig clay out of the ground, you have to shape it into a ceramic mug, fire it, glaze it, fire it again. You need to generate electricity, maybe a water wheel would work, I don't know. You need to process steel and roll it into an espresso machine. You need to milk the cows. Let's go back. You need to breed the cows that produce the right kind of milk. But it's fantastically complicated, and that's true of any product, almost any product, in today's economy. It is a team effort. It's the product of an amazing team effort, and there's actually nobody in charge of the team. No one in charge of the team, which is even more remarkable. In fact, I'm going to walk this way for a second. I'm going to steal a copy of my book from the bookstore. I'm not even going to pay for it. Look at that. I just got it. Yeah, she's got me. She's got my number. Watch this. Watch this. Don't trust an economist. Watch this book disappear over the course of the speech. I just wanted to read briefly, because who wants to listen to an author reading his own book for very long? Just wanted to read. I've said most of this. I'm just going to read one paragraph. The Economist knows that the cappuccino is the product of an incredible team effort. Not only that, there's nobody in charge of the team. The economist Paul Seabright reminds us of the pleas of the Soviet official trying to comprehend the Western system. Tell me, he said, who's in charge of the supply of bread to London? The question is comical, but the answer, nobody, is dizzying. And that's one reason why economists don't understand the economy. It is a decentralized process of fantastic complexity, and nobody understands it. And, that's okay, because I think, and I hope I'll convince you, that there are still things that we can do, ways that we can respond to the economy, ways we can try to shape the economy, with the right degree of humility that makes some sense. But first of all, I want to explain why you should never trust an economist to tell you which stock to buy, or where a house is in an up-and-coming area, whether the property market's going to catch fire again or whether it's going to continue to sink. Never trust an economist to tell you this. And the reason, I think, is, well, think about picking the shortest line in the supermarket. This is a simple problem, okay? You look at the line at the supermarket, you look at the queue, you think to yourself, that line looks pretty short. I think, oh no, maybe it's a bit... Oh no, they've all got baskets. That's quick. And I see they've got cash, they're not going to pay with card. That should be quick. Oh, someone, like a grandmother with vouchers just stood in the line. Okay, that's no good. Oh, maybe there's a short line over there. That looks pretty short. Yeah, the cashier there, she's scanning fast. Oh, someone's in that line as well. Every time you stand there, you're trying to pick a short line. Every time you think you've seen a short line, someone else gets in it. And that's just fundamental about the way the system works. If it was obvious which was the shortest line, someone's standing in it, and it's not the shortest line anymore. And the same is true, in fact, it's more true of, say, company stock. If it was obvious that a company stock was cheap, well, there are an awful lot of people on Wall Street paid a lot of money to work that out and buy it. They are being paid millions of dollars to stand in the queue before you get there. And the same is true to some extent of property. Yeah? If it's so obvious that this neighborhood is up and coming, why are they selling you their house? Yeah? Why are they selling you their house? It's not easy. You can get in the shortest line, but it's never going to be easy. It's never going to be obvious. And for the TV show, I tried to persuade people otherwise. Here's the result.
When you try to buy the most promising share, all you're doing is trying to pick the shortest queue. But so's everyone else. And if it's obvious which is the shortest, people will all move across, and it won't be the shortest queue for long.
You can see I'm in uniform here.
Thousands of professionals are all trying to find the same bargains, so of course there are no predictable winners.
If it were predictable, people would cash in on it, instantly changing the value of that share or property. That would cancel out any financial benefit.
Economists call this an efficient market, which simply means that, like the queues, the market adjusts according to all the available information, and there's no clear advantage for anyone for long. So if I said I was an expert who could tell people which queue was guaranteed to be the shortest, would people believe me, or even pay me for my advice?
Excuse me, you're in this big queue, and I'm an expert on queues. So I thought I could tell you whether you should move queues or not, if you're interested. But it will cost you £5. £5, we're willing to queue for a little bit longer. Okay, thank you. This is an absolutely titanic queue, and you're at the back of it. I am an expert, so I can tell you which queue is the best queue to be in.
This is a bit like supermarkets, where you always get the wrong one with your trolley.
Exactly, unless you're an expert.
You can take me to the front then.
Well, I couldn't take you to the front, but I can tell you which queue to pick.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, if you're interested.
Okay, yeah, very interesting.
Okay, interested enough to pay? Would you pay like £5?
Okay, definitely.
Because you don't...
Any advice?
Because expert advice is never free. I could give you some advice as to whether... So I've studied, what type of person takes longest in the queue, and which of these cashiers, which of these checkout people are the quickest.
You don't get that much, do you?
Well, no, I don't. You don't think I can tell you which is the shortest queue?
Unless you knew something I didn't know with the staff, but unless it's a new member of staff or something.
So if I had inside information,
Maybe.
then I might know. But just being an expert who thinks he knows about queues, you don't take that very seriously.
These people aren't stupid, and they quite rightly refuse to pay me for something I can't actually predict. So when a financial expert offers you a guaranteed hot tip, think first before you hand over your cash.
So now you know all the reasons why experts shouldn't be trusted. The next time somebody promises to tell you about a cheap share or a cheap house, you should treat them with the same suspicion that these people treated me when I offered to point them to the shortest queue. So that's why you should never trust an economist to forecast anything. So is this a counsel of despair? Now I'm telling you that economists can't forecast, they can't make you money, can't tell you what the stock market is going to do, they don't understand the economy, it's too complicated, they can't even get you a date. I mean, what are they good for? But I think there are actually some valuable lessons from this way of understanding the economy. I mean, the first is that our natural tendency, which is if we see a problem with the economy, let's just put some guy in charge of it, and he'll fix it. So this is not a very wise way of approaching things. For a start, he'll probably ask economists to advise him, and then they don't understand, so things will go wrong. Now, I'm not one of those economists, and you will meet some of them. I'm not one of those economists who says markets are perfect, markets do everything. There was never any point in interfering with markets. They're just wonderful, and I don't believe that. That's not true. There's several chapters in the book where I explain first what you would have to do to actually see a perfect market, and just to understand what a perfect market would look like, you realize, oh yeah, so that would be never. Then we never have a perfect market. And then I explain what the problems are, why markets go wrong, and then what we might be able to do about them, rather than just sweeping them away and replacing them with some guy who will get it wrong, possibly even worse than the market does. So here's an example. If you try and drive your car through, or if you tried in 2003 to drive your car through central London, you would have noticed that the speed of traffic in central London is not very good. In fact, the speed of traffic in central London in 2003 was slower than the speed of traffic in central London in 1903, which is quite impressive. In 2003, the average speed was 11 miles an hour, and in 1903, when the roads were uncongested but populated by horses, the average speed was 12 miles an hour. So this is not good.
And this is what an economist what most of us would call a traffic jam or congestion. An economist calls an externality. Yeah? He calls it an externality, and it's a market failure. And the externality is, when I get in my car and drive, I am getting in your way. I am blocking the box for you. I am ahead of you in the queue for the traffic lights. I am taking up space on the road. I am switching lanes. I am causing trouble. I'm emitting pollution. I'm emitting carbon dioxide, lead, carbon monoxide, noise. I occasionally run over toddlers, that kind of thing. I'm causing trouble for everybody else. Now, maybe not a lot of trouble, but some trouble. Okay? In fact, actually, not a lot of trouble. It's important to bear this in mind. I'm just causing a little bit of trouble. However, with another 500,000 million drivers on the roads of London, all causing a little bit of trouble, that all adds up to a big amount of trouble. It's a problem. It's a market failure. Now, ordinarily, most of what we do actually causes other people trouble. If I buy a cappuccino, I'm causing trouble. There's some person who would be quite happy to be watching a movie, hanging around at home, who's had to put on a stupid uniform, get up early in the morning, come to the Starbucks and make me a cup of coffee. I walk in, I say, "Cup of coffee, please," and they just have to make it. They don't know me. They start to make me a cup of coffee. People work very, very hard growing the coffee beans. People work very, very hard raising the cows, milking the cows. For this cappuccino, people are going to a lot of trouble. I'm causing people a problem. But it's not a market failure. It's not the same kind of problem as with a traffic jam. And the reason is, I pay. I pay Starbucks. Starbucks pays the barista. They pay the coffee manufacturers. They pay the dairy farmer. They pay. Everybody along the line gets paid for their trouble. But if I block the box and you're 5 minutes late for work because I was on the roads, I don't pay you 5 minutes. I don't pay you at all. You don't get anything from me. But there is a way of giving the markets a little bit of a hand. You can implement some kind of tax or charge on using the roads. And this is something that they did in London. And I want to emphasize it's not going to work everywhere, but it works in London. He put a perimeter around central London. He said, if you want to drive in on a weekday, it's going to cost you £5, which is $10. And they put it up, $12. And they're going to put it up again, it's going to be $18. Yeah? It's going to cost you. And you know what? 90% of drivers paid. And they got something for their money. They got to work in 20 minutes instead of an hour. So you paid $12 and you saved 40 minutes of time. And you can understand, for a lot of, actually you saved 40 minutes each way, so you saved over an hour of time. So if you're paid more than $10 an hour, it's actually not a bad deal. Yeah? And you can see a lot of people paid, maybe didn't pay happily, but they got something for their money. And then a few people stopped. And the funny thing was, it only took 10% of the drivers to stop for the speed of the traffic to move up dramatically. Suddenly you found the congestion had fallen very sharply, average travel times had risen, average speeds had risen, travel times had fallen. The predictability of how long it was going to take you to get there had also improved. So instead of being, well, maybe an hour, maybe two, it was, well, half an hour and definitely not more than 40 minutes. You would have, and that really helps. So this was tremendous value to the citizens of London. The interesting thing for me is you could get that effect in another way. You could, for instance, say, if your car registration number begins with A, B, C, D, or E, you can't drive on Mondays. If it's F, G, H, I, J, you can't drive on Tuesdays. You can try and legislate some other way, or you can try and make parking expensive, or you can try and gum up the roads. But none of these systems work nearly as well, because for a start, we don't know which of those journeys are important. I mean, that person whose car registration begins with B might have a very, very important meeting to get to. Or maybe they're in labour, or whatever. We don't know how valuable that journey is to them. And we've just said, you can't travel on a Monday. But with the congestion charge, if it's more than $12 of value to you, you do it. If it's not, you don't. We also don't know the best way for people to get around the congestion charge. So there are different possibilities. You could drive around central London. You could carpool. It doesn't save you the congestion charge, but you split it, obviously. You could cycle. you get a moped, you could buy a Prius, you could catch the bus, which of course is now flowing a lot more freely because there are fewer cars. You could get on the London Underground, you could get a train. You could change your job. That sounds ridiculous, right? But we change our jobs on average once every 3 years. So maybe you don't change your job immediately, but then an opportunity for a new job comes up and you think, hey, that job, I wouldn't have to pay the congestion charge. That's worth something. You could telecommute. You could go to your boss. You could say, this is costing me $12 every day. If I could work from home on Fridays, that would help. And the boss may be like, actually, there's no reason. Why not? Oh, of course, if you work in Starbucks, the boss isn't going to go, sure, you can work from home on Fridays. But that's the point. We can't, some bureaucrat says everyone can work from home on Fridays. That doesn't work. But each individual business, each individual is getting the signal from the price, and they can respond to that signal however they want. So you're keeping that decentralized nature of the economy. And I think it's worked very well. And it's not just congestion that you could deal with in this way. I think the general approach of trying to use markets as much as possible and trying to behave with humility towards the economy, because it's a complicated thing, has paid dividends, not just in the UK, not just in the US, but in places like China as well. And in the last chapter of my book, the whole book I just mooch around, going into Starbucks, going into Whole Foods, getting stuck in traffic jams, doing everyday things. That's why it's the Undercover Economist, just me, just an ordinary guy wandering around, but looking at things using economics. In the last chapter of the book, I'm doing exactly that, but I'm mooching around Shanghai and Beijing and trying to work out how I interpret what I see there. And the story is very interesting. You had a country where, at the end of the 1970s, they were producing less grain than they had produced at the end of the 1940s. You had 30 million people die in a famine in the 50s. If you see the world population graph, you can look this sort of thing up. If you just look, you can see the drop in the population of the world because of the famine that hit China. And the famine that hit China was caused by one guy saying, you know what, I think we should grow our crops in a different way. It would be better to plant them more closely and do it like this and blah, blah, blah. And so he's Mao, and no one wants to tell him it doesn't work. And when it starts to fail, the crops start to rot. No one tells him. When he goes on a tour to look at the crops, they stack them all up. They have fans installed in the fields to keep the air flowing so the crops aren't rotting. Everything looks great to him. He's getting no feedback from the economy. When people start starving, the government is increasing its exports of grain to other countries because there's no famine, right? There's no feedback in that system whatsoever. Contrast that to what happened at the end of the 1970s, where Deng Xiaoping came to power, and he just said, you know what, you guys might want to try something different and we won't stop you. That was all he said, we're just not going to stop you. And a few local areas experimented with the radical idea that if some farmer grew extra rice, he could keep it. He could sell it to somebody else. He could do what he wanted. So suddenly there's an incentive to work harder or to innovate, come up with new ideas. And you know what? A lot of people didn't respond to that incentive. It was just some people who did. That was enough. And in 1979, 2% of Chinese farmers were under that system. And by 1983, 98% of Chinese farmers were under that system. They tried it out. It worked. Suddenly, okay, fine, let's go. Let's not wait around. It worked. And China has been, I think the right word for, people describe Chinese reforms as gradual. I think maybe that's the wrong word. Empirical, maybe, experimental. They keep trying things. If it works, they do it. So the same thing with a manufacturing base. You've got a coal mine producing 10 tons of coal, ordered by the government plan to ship the coal to the steel mill, which will use the coal to make 10 tons of steel, and then the steel will be shipped to a construction site, all written down in the plan. And then about 1984, they said, you know what, if the plan says 10 tons of coal and you can make 11, and you can find someone to take the last ton of coal, that's okay. But first, you deliver according to the plan. The same with the steel mill. If you can produce an extra ton of steel, you can find someone to take that extra ton of steel, you do it, but first you do what is specified in the plan. And that means that everybody kept their jobs, there was complete security, everybody knew what was going on, they had the plan. A coal mine that was inefficient that was badly run wouldn't be able to expand, wouldn't be able to deliver more coal. A steel mill that didn't work very well wouldn't deliver more steel. But some of these places were just sitting around going, well, we could produce 50 tons, but the plan says 10. So we just produce 10. And suddenly they produce 50. So all the efficient factories are starting to expand. And yeah, there are places operating that, by the strict logic of the market, should be closed down. But they're kept open, but the cost of that is tolerable. And you have this experimental process, and after 15 years of this, the plan, which has not changed for 15 years, is so tiny, they just rip it up and throw it away and no one even notices. It's an experimental strategy. And it's a strategy that has had a big effect on the lives of a lot of people. And economists like to talk about economic growth a lot. I think there's something more important than that going on. I recognize that what's happened in China has caused a lot of pain to a lot of people, including in China. What I argue in the book is that not that this is a good thing, not that this is not something we should worry about, but I just list the alternatives, none of which I can see are any better. And the progress, the fact that this is a temporary situation, that we are moving in the right direction. That's something I argue. But, I can quote all the statistics, but I'm more interested in the people. So let me just read you the last page of the book, and then I've read you the first page, I'll read you the last page, and then I'm very, very happy to take questions. In the end, economics is about people, something that economists have done a very bad job at explaining. And economic growth is about a better life for individuals, more choice, less fear, less toil and hardship. Like other economists, I believe that sweatshops are better than the alternatives, without a doubt, better than starvation under the Great Leap Forward or life in modern North Korea. But if I did not also believe they were a step to something better, I would not be such an enthusiastic supporter of China's reforms. And that's why I was cheered by the latest news from China. The wealth hasn't been evenly spread, but it is slowly seeping inland from the Gold Coast of Shanghai and Shenzhen. Between 1978 and 1995, 2/3 of China's provinces grew faster than any country anywhere in the world. Most importantly, the people of China are feeling the difference. After years of paying low wages, because the supply of migrant labour from China seemed unlimited, factories on the Gold Coast are starting to run out of willing workers. Foreign-owned factories pay a bit more. They enjoy easier recruitment, lower turnover. But wages will have to rise, conditions will have to improve, because inland China is catching up. In 2003, Yang Li did what many Chinese workers have done. She left home to work in a sweatshop in the Pearl River Delta. A month later, after working 13-hour shifts, she decided to go home and start her own business, a hair salon. Every day at the factory was just work, work, she says. My life here is comfortable. Yang Li's parents had to survive the Cultural Revolution. Her grandparents had to survive the Great Leap Forward. But Yang Li has real choices, and she lives in a country where those choices mean something for her quality of life. She tried factory work. She realized it wasn't for her. Now she says, I can close the salon whenever I want. And economics is about Yang Li's choice. Thank you very much. Now, we have time for questions. I'd be very delighted to take some. So.
Thank you, Tim. First of all, do you realize you're confounding the issue with your facts and logic? That's were you aware of Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it. Yeah.
He actually brings up a classic bait and switch where ethanol and corn, there are hidden costs in growing corn.
Mm-hmm.
It takes barrels and barrels of oil to produce corn. So, I mean, that's a classic bait and switch. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think this is important. It's very easy for us when we're facing, say, an environmental problem to try and legislate a solution. So we say, okay, we'd like some subsidies for corn farmers. And then you go, well, hang on, you could subsidize corn farmers so you could grow biofuels, but is that how much energy does it take to grow the corn? Well, hang on. Why don't we just import the sugar from Brazil? That's a much cheaper, much more effective way of producing ethanol rather than producing it from corn. Well, no, we can't do that because we have tariffs. We don't want Brazilian sugar because, well, I don't know why we don't want Brazilian sugar because we want to favor a small number of very rich men in Florida, and the rest of us want to pay a lot of money for our candy. I don't know why that works, but actually I do. But that's another subject. We push and pull and start and tax breaks for these guys and push and some of it may work and some of it may not. But I know what will work, which is a tax on gasoline, a tax on crude oil, or best of all, if you're worried about climate change, which is I think what's behind a lot of this, a tax on emitting carbon. You have a tax on emitting carbon. Okay, now, all of us at that point, I suspect this is not exactly how the tax would work, but if we had a tax on emitting carbon, all of us would be paying for breathing. Yeah, we're emitting carbon dioxide, we are contributing to climate change, we should pay the tax. Okay, but I can guarantee that every single one of us would say, okay, I'll pay, because that's a very high value use of carbon dioxide. And a lot of what we use carbon dioxide for, a lot of what the byproducts of carbon dioxide, they're very, very valuable. And we would pay the tax. And by the way, when we pay the tax, the money isn't wasted. This is money we could use to pay off the debt, or it could be used to reduce income tax. I mean, I've never really understood why we're so keen to tax people for doing good things like making money, and we don't want to tax people for bad things like clogging up the roads and burning energy. I don't know why that, but that's the way it works too. At least that's the way it works in the States. If you give people that signal, then to use a terrible bit of jargon, the low-hanging fruit gets picked. Like, we could make the cars more efficient. That's easy. We could make one trip instead of 2 trips. It's easy. We could insulate our houses. Easy. Maybe what happens is we see some new sources of fuel. I suspect a lot of it would just be plain simple energy conservation. But we keep the choices with individuals. Is it important for me? Is this important for my lifestyle? Do I value this? Is this important for my business or for the pleasure I take in just being alive to pay this tax? If so, I pay it. But if not, I don't pay it. And that is going to work a lot better than regulatory measures to push and pull certain special interests. Thanks for the question. There was a question right over here. Can we have one and then we'll come back for the second one if there's time?
What percentage of factory workers can actually accumulate capital to become small business owners, and how many small business owners can the economy actually support? And the second question was the ecological impact of the region, the inland growth of factories, and how that affects many.
Okay, so you've cheated and asked 2 questions, but they're good questions. That's fine. Okay, on the ecological impact. The ecological impact of China's growth so far has been dramatically positive. It won't be forever. The reason it's been positive is because under Mao, you had unbelievably wasteful uses of energy. So, your industrial program is take good steel, melt it down in your back garden using a coal-fired furnace with no filters to make bad steel, which is then useless. Repeat until necessary, because that's what Mao tells you to do. Now, you can get rid of that and grow your economy and emit less pollution. That's easy. So we've had this one-off hit in the 1990s, a big fall in the emission of carbon dioxide from China, big fall in urban air pollution, which I document in the book. We're not going to have that again. For the next 15, 20 years, China's rise is going to have an environmental impact, for sure. Now, historically, what we have always seen is that from the pollutants, whenever a country gets rich, it is able to cut down on the pollutants that really matter to our quality of life. Not by magic, by legislation, but by legislation that is demanded in a rich country. Yeah? So we know how the waterborne diseases, pesticides in the US, we had Carson, Silent Spring, all this stuff sort of damped down. We have much, much cleaner air now. The same thing in the UK. Thousands of people just dying of smog pollution in London in the 1950s. Just changed the law because we were rich, because we could afford to do it. The Chinese, when they get rich, will also do the same thing. So the other question is about, sure, how many people have these choices? Well, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the numbers. What I do know is where they came from, the terrible poverty, the terrible oppression. And we see the sweatshops in the United Kingdom, first of all, world leaders in sweatshops. We got there first. In the United States, then we see them in Japan, then we see them in Taiwan, then we see them in Korea, and they all go away when the country gets rich. They all go. Well, we don't have people working for 50 cents a day. We don't have people working for 50 cents a day. This is a country that is getting richer. So behind the question is, could you somehow legislate to make these sweatshops go away? And I think the answer is only to a limited extent. I mean, we could legislate. I don't think I was paid enough money for my book. And we could legislate that I should be paid $1 million for my next book. And we know what will happen. I will not get a book deal. Yeah? Now, to a certain extent, you can legislate to improve conditions in a very poor country like China. At a certain point, that legislation becomes very counterproductive because no one wants to go to China anymore. We could say all Chinese workers have to be paid $10 an hour. And I guarantee you that all the money would leave China and they would all be paid nothing. So, and finally, I guess I point to the poorest place in the world, which is Africa. There are no sweatshops in Africa. I visit Africa, I talk about the African experience in my book. There is no globalization in Africa, there are no sweatshops, no one's interested, it's just not worth, even if they work for nothing, it is not worth anybody's while to do business with Africa, which sounds incredibly harsh. That's just a description of the reality. So I look forward to the day when African governments are able to provide an environment where we get sweatshops in Africa. Not because I want to see sweatshops, because they are the step on the ladder. And I don't think there's ever been a country that has become rich without going through that process first. So these are serious and good questions. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on health insurance and health coverage in the U.S. I know in your book, I think you talk about the Singapore model.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you had any more recent thoughts on
Yeah, the thing that really strikes me about health insurance here is we have too much and too little. Okay, so we have too much because we're insured. If we have insurance, we're insured for everything. This is a little bit like having insurance for, your auto insurance. You want insurance against theft, right? You want insurance against crashing the car. Do you want insurance against having to fill your tank up? Insurance against replacing your tires? These are not things that we want insurance for, because these are totally predictable expenses. And if you imagine a world where you had insurance to fill up your tank, well then you're not paying the cost of filling up your tank. So what do you think the experience of going to a gas station is going to be like? Well, you're going to drive in, the valet is going to take your keys, you're going to sit down in a nice cushy waiting room, you'll be fed coffee. This is going to be like going to the doctor, right? You get nice free coffee and magazines to read and all this glossy stuff while they fill your car up, and they'll charge you $15 a gallon for the gasoline, but you don't care because you're not paying the bill. This is not a way to encourage price sensitivity and sensitivity to cost effectiveness. So we don't want insurance for that. And I think we should be paying for that out of our own pocket. And then you have this problem that you have 45 million Americans that don't have insurance at all. And I think that those two problems are linked. So I think that it's a very hard problem. Yeah, this is a very hard problem. There are lots and lots of reasons why the market for healthcare doesn't work very well. But I think that we could make it work better. I think it needs some government subsidy, a good chunk of redistribution to make sure the people at the bottom have enough to pay for basic healthcare costs. Everybody should have insurance for the lung transplant, the heart attack, the serious costs. And I don't think anybody should have insurance for a regular checkup. People are prepared to pay. You don't need insurance to go to Whole Foods or Safeway and buy food. You just do it. You don't need insurance. You do it. And I think the same should be true of these regular predictable expenses. So that's my suggestion. But with humility, because economists don't understand the economy. There's a question here.
In the fire it said
could I please explain why you can't get a decent used car? Actually, somebody spoke to me just before the speech, and she said, well, I don't know what an economist thinks, but as far as I'm concerned, you can't buy a decent used car because anybody who has a decent used car won't sell it. And she's completely right. But actually what's behind the process is something that economists calls adverse selection. So the idea is, it would be fine if like Andy, our hapless playboy with a medallion, if you could prove your quality to the world, then you'd sell a good used car. Sure you would, because you'd get a good price. And you'd sell a bad used car as well, and you'd get a bad price. And they would both be a fair price. The problem that we have, I mean, if you imagine restaurants as an analogy, you can go and eat at a really fancy restaurant, or you can go and eat at McDonald's. You've got the choice because you can see the quality, you know what you're paying for. But with used cars, the buyer is not sure of the quality. The seller does know the quality. The seller would love to convince the buyer that it's a great car, but the seller is not able to prove it. And if the seller's not able to prove it, the seller won't get a good price. And if the seller doesn't get a good price, the seller will hold on to the car. So if you want to buy a good used car, you find somebody who you trust a lot, or you find someone who is moving to a different country or something, or for some reason actually has a real reason to sell the car other than just it's a terrible car. That's how you buy a good used car. The interesting thing for me is that actually this applies not just to used cars, but it applies to all kinds of parts of the economy. So it applies to healthcare insurance, I write about in the book. It also applies to getting a job. And let's say you're smart, hardworking, honest, and you have no way of demonstrating these qualities to an employer. Well, in that case, maybe you set up your own business. Let's say, on the other hand, you're stupid, lazy, dumb. Not you, sir, but people you may know. Well, they have no way of the employer has no way of determining whether you're good or not. So the good people go off and be entrepreneurs, and the idiots get hired by bureaucracies, which I think explains a great deal of our daily experience. So yeah, I'm exaggerating, but there is something of this in the used car market, something of this in personnel economics, and something of this in health insurance as well. Thank you. I think we've time for one more, maybe two more questions, quick ones. So, sir, and then, yeah.
Yes. What about behavioral economics? I'm an economist.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the efficient market theory, Warren Buffett, when he was asked if the market efficient, he said, some of the time it is. And we have like stock market bubbles, for example, in one of the early
Yeah.
2000s.
Yeah. I mean, the market's pretty efficient. I mean, yeah, it's not efficient, but good luck beating it. Buffett does it, but others don't. But yeah, you're right. There's a big literature now which is getting a lot of press on behavioral economics that comes up with all kinds of examples as to when people do not behave the way that economists predict they should behave. And I think this is very interesting literature. It gets a lot of coverage. People like economists to be wrong about stuff. I question some of it, though. You have to get the next book for my take on some of this. But here's an example. The behavioral economics literature says if you're hiring somebody, there's no way that you would pay them more than the going rate. You pay them the market rate. Why would you pay them extra? And if you happen to get a job paid with a really generous salary, that much more than you really need to do the job, then you would just goof off the same as anyone else, and you'd just take the money, and what suckers they were for paying you. That's the standard economic view. Now, the more common sense, intuitive, behavioral economic, psychological view is no. If someone is paid more than they need to be paid, they will be grateful and they will work harder. This is called the gift exchange theory. And there's some great lab work that shows that this is how people behave. Employers often offer higher wages than they need to, and workers, in gratitude, work harder than they need to, and so actually it turns out in retrospect to be profit maximizing for the employers, and it all makes sense. The trouble is that these lab experiments, they don't actually involve anybody doing any work. I mean, when I say employer, I mean employer, and when I say employee, I mean employee, and these are people just ticking boxes and saying, yeah, I'll pay the employee $15 an hour. And that costs them some money. They're in the experiment. There are some financial incentives. And then the employee gets a thing and it says, well, the market clearing wage is $10 an hour, but you are going to be paid $15 an hour. And what do you want to do? And you go, oh, that's generous. I will work hard. And they tick a box. They don't work. They just tick a box. It costs them some money. They have to pay money, but that's what they do. So an economist at Chicago called John List, I'm a big fan of his, said, okay, fine, that's very interesting. I wonder what happens really. And what he did was he piggybacked on a temping agency, and they were hiring people to go doorstepping for charity, door to door, trying to solicit donations, and also another group of people who were doing data entry in the library. And so for each of these groups, they were offered $8 an hour, $12 an hour, whatever. And they agreed. And then for half of them, they'd chosen at random, he would go in and say, great news, you agreed to do this for $10 an hour, but actually I'm going to pay you $15 an hour. Now, off you go and good luck. And what he found was people do, in gratitude, presumably, work harder when they receive the $15 an hour. Until lunch. The effect lasts 90 minutes for data entry clerks, and it lasts until lunch on day one for charity doorsteppers, and then they go back to being the stupid, work-shy, goofing off employees that you would have expected, and the effect just evaporates. So behavioral economics is interesting. I'm sure that some of the results that they find are real. I'm also sure that some of the results they find are not real, and there is quite an interesting counter-literature of things that you see in the laboratory where when you actually go into the real world and try and replicate it, it turns out that people are a little bit closer to the rational economic man than we really like to think. I'm afraid I talked too long and I don't have time for the last question. So thank you very much. It's been a great audience. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.